Most buildings blend into the background. The Sydney Opera House refused to. In the 1950s, Sydney dreamt of a landmark and got a global icon. From a bold sketch by an unknown Danish architect to an engineering feat once thought impossible, it redefined what public architecture could be. This is the story of the building that changed skylines and the way we dream in design. Sydney in the 1950s was a city growing in confidence, but still searching for a stronger cultural identity. It had a thriving economy and a busy port, but when it came to the arts, it lacked a building that could stand beside its ambitions. Theaters were scattered around the city. None of them could host large-scale opera or major international performances. Civic leaders knew that if Sydney wanted to be seen as a world-class city, it needed a venue that would make a clear statement both to its residents and to the world. They wanted a building that could hold its own in photographs alongside the harbor and bridge. It had to be something that would last for decades, if not centuries, and speak to a new cultural era for Australia. To find the right design, the New South Wales government announced an international competition in 1956. The rules were straightforward. Architects were invited to design a performing arts centre on Bennelong Point, a small peninsula that reached out into Sydney Harbour. The site was remarkable. Water surrounded it on 3 sides. The Sydney Harbour Bridge sat in the background. The challenge was as much about making a building that suited its surroundings as it was about creating something functional. The organizers expected interesting ideas, but they also assumed that the winning design would be something safe, practical, and achievable with the construction techniques of the time. More than 230 entries came in from 32 countries. Many were predictable. They showed conventional theaters dressed up with modest decorative features. Then there was one entry that broke every expectation. It came from a 38-year-old Danish architect named Jørn Utzon. His submission showed a set of white, sail-like forms rising from a broad podium. The sketches were loose and dramatic. They gave a sense of movement, as if the building itself was part of the harbor. Some people saw sails, others saw seashells. The design seemed to float above the water. What it did not look like was a conventional opera house. The competition jury was divided at first. The design was unlike anything they had seen. It did not include full engineering plans. The cost was unknown. Some jurors dismissed it as impossible to build. But one juror, the Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen, was struck by its boldness. He argued that the competition should be about finding a design worthy of the site, not just one that could be easily built. His persuasion tipped the balance, and Utzon's design was declared the winner in 1957. From the moment the decision was announced, debate began. Engineers questioned how the roof could be built. Politicians asked how much it would cost. Members of the public wondered whether the building would ever be finished. Skeptics argued that the design was too ambitious for Sydney, too risky for the taxpayer, and too unusual to be understood. In many ways, these doubts were natural. Buildings of that era rarely pushed beyond familiar forms. The opera house would require methods and materials that did not yet exist in practical form. Yet this is where the story reveals something important about risk in architecture. A safe design might have satisfied the immediate need for a performance venue, but it would not have redefined the city. Taking a risk on an unproven idea opened the door to something that could change the way people thought about what a building could be. Utzon's vision was not just about a place to perform opera. It was about making a form that connected with its environment and became part of the city's identity. The willingness to take that leap is not unique to the Opera House, though few examples are as visible. A useful parallel is the Centre Pompidou in Paris, designed in the 1970s by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers. That project also won a competition with a design that many thought too radical. Instead of hiding the building's structure and services, the architects placed them on the outside in bright colors. Like the Opera House, it broke from convention, faced heavy criticism during construction, and later became one of the city's most visited landmarks. Both cases show that risk in design often involves resisting the pressure to make something familiar and instead pushing for an idea that seems unusual or even impractical at first. In the case of the Opera House, that decision to support a bold, untested design set the stage for one of the most complex engineering challenges of the 20th century. It required inventing solutions that had not been tried before. It demanded a level of cooperation between architect and engineer that was unusual for the time. It also created a sense of anticipation as people followed the progress of a building that seemed to defy normal expectations. If the New South Wales government had chosen a safer design in 1957, Sydney might have gained a perfectly functional concert hall and theater. But the city would have missed the chance to create an image recognized around the world. This is the hidden cost of avoiding risk in design. What is lost is not just the possibility of failure, but also the possibility of something extraordinary. When Jørn Utzon began designing the Sydney Opera House, he looked far beyond conventional building forms. He drew from the natural curves of sails on the water, the spiral forms of seashells, the stepped masses of Mayan temples, and even the geometry of an orange peel. Each reference gave him a way to think about shapes that could be both beautiful and strong. The sails suggested movement and connection to the harbor. The seashells showed how curves could carry weight without thick walls. The Mayan temples offered a way to anchor the building visually to its base. The orange peel inspired a way to break down complex curves into repeatable shapes, as each segment of a peel has a natural curve but fits together into a sphere. The original sketches for the roof looked impossible to build. Engineers at first could not find a way to turn the flowing shapes into a stable structure. The key change came when Utzon realized he could cut all the roof shells from the surface of a single sphere. This spherical solution meant every curved section would share the same radius, making them easier to model, calculate, and build. By using one geometric source, he reduced the number of different shapes and sizes. This allowed construction crews to create molds that could be reused instead of building a unique form for every single piece. It also solved many of the alignment problems that came with the early free-form sketches. With the geometry fixed, the next challenge was how to actually make the shells. Utzon and his team used precast concrete ribs to form the skeleton of each sail. Between these ribs, smaller precast panels filled the gaps. Each rib segment could be lifted into place by crane, locked together, and then supported temporarily until the full arch was complete. This modular approach reduced work at height and let workers repeat the same tasks rather than inventing new solutions for each piece. The precision needed was extreme. Each segment had to match the curve exactly, or the structure would twist under its own weight. By making the ribs in controlled factory conditions, they improved quality and reduced weather delays on site. At the time, most architects and engineers still relied on slide rules and manual drafting for calculations. The Opera House pushed this to the limit. The forces in the roof shells were too complex for quick hand methods. The team used one of the earliest computer-aided structural analysis programs to test their designs. The computer model broke each shell into a network of small elements. The machine then calculated how each element would react to weight, wind, and movement. This let the engineers refine the thickness of the ribs and panels, avoiding both weak points and unnecessary bulk. For a project of this size and complexity, this was groundbreaking. Without it, they might have had to build larger safety margins, adding weight and cost. The lessons from this work are still used in projects once dismissed as unbuildable. The key is not to start by forcing the design into existing construction methods, but to find the essential geometric logic behind it. Once the logic is clear, you can use modular construction, prefabrication, and digital analysis to turn it into a real structure. The geometry needs to be simple enough to produce repeatable parts, but not so simple that it loses the character of the original idea. In the Opera House, the sphere provided that balance. A clear example of these lessons in action is the Beijing National Stadium, known as the Bird's Nest. At first glance, its random-looking steel lattice seems far harder to build than smooth sails. The design by Herzog and de Meuron and artist Ai Weiwei aimed to look like a woven bowl, with beams crisscrossing in all directions. Early critics called it too complex to fabricate or assemble. The breakthrough came when engineers recognized that the random pattern could be mapped onto a regular underlying grid. This grid provided the actual load-bearing structure. Many of the apparent beams are not structural, but act as cladding, giving the irregular woven look without each member carrying major forces. The bird's nest team also relied on modular prefabrication. Large steel sections were assembled on the ground and then lifted into place, where they connected to form the curved bowl shape. Each module followed precise geometry, even though to the eye they looked irregular. This is similar to how the Opera House shells followed one sphere despite looking different from various angles. Both projects used repetition hidden within apparent complexity to make construction possible. Computer analysis played a central role in the bird's nest as well. The interlocking steel members created force paths that shifted depending on where the load was applied, such as during an earthquake or under heavy wind. Engineers modeled the stadium in 3 dimensions and simulated different conditions to see where stress concentrated. This allowed them to adjust the thickness of steel members and the placement of joints. Without such tools, the weight of the steel needed to ensure safety might have doubled, making the project too costly or too heavy for the foundations. These examples show that solving an unbuildable design often means looking at the problem in layers. First, identify a form or geometry that makes sense both visually and structurally. Second, find a way to divide it into repeatable components that can be made with precision and assembled reliably. Third, use digital tools to understand exactly how the structure will behave so that each piece can be optimized. In both the Opera House and the bird's nest, the apparent complexity hides a deep order. The public sees a free-form work of art, but the builders work from a clear, controlled plan. A useful way to think about this is to imagine building a huge puzzle. If each piece has its own unique shape, you need to cut, fit, and test them one by one, which takes too long and risks poor fits. But if you can design the puzzle so that many pieces are identical or follow a simple rule, you can make them in batches and know they will fit when they reach the site. The Opera House achieved this by cutting all the shells from one sphere. The bird's nest did it by mapping an irregular pattern onto a regular grid. The trick is to hide the repetition so the finished work still feels alive and unique. Utzon's approach was not just about copying forms from nature, but about finding in them a system that could guide both design and construction. A sail is not just a curve, it is a surface under tension, shaped by the forces of wind and rigging. A seashell is not just pretty, its spiral distributes stress as it grows. A Mayan temple is not just stepped, its massing stabilizes it on a platform. By understanding these systems, he could abstract their rules into architecture. This mindset can help solve challenges where the first reaction is that the design cannot be built. When work on the Sydney Opera House began in 1959, the budget was set at $7 million Australian dollars, and the schedule called for completion in 4 years. From the start, both figures were unrealistic. The design was far ahead of what construction techniques could deliver at the time, and early work began before the engineering was complete. This meant foundations were built while the final roof shape was still undecided. As the design evolved, each change caused delays and added costs. By 1966, the project had already consumed more than $13 million, and the roof shells were still incomplete. The public saw the gap between the original promise and the reality as a sign of waste. Politicians used it to score points, and the Opera House became as much a political problem as a technical one. Political interference grew as the government sought to control costs and speed up work. Ministers pressed for fixed deadlines and reduced spending, even when the engineering required more time. Utzon resisted changes that he felt would weaken the design. He also refused to submit detailed cost breakdowns, arguing that his responsibility was to the artistic and technical success of the building, not to political demands. The relationship between him and the New South Wales government collapsed. In February 1966, the minister in charge stopped payments to his office. Utzon resigned soon after. His departure shocked the architectural world and split public opinion. Some saw him as a victim of short-sighted politics. Others believed he had failed to manage the project responsibly. After Utzon left, the government appointed a new team to complete the building. Peter Hall, an architect from the Public Works Department, took the lead on the interiors. He inherited a complex situation. The roof shells were nearly finished, but much of the interior layout was unresolved. Utzon's original plans for the main hall, smaller theaters, and public spaces were incomplete and in some cases unworkable with the structure as built. Hall had to make practical decisions under pressure, balancing available space, acoustics, and budget limits. One of his most significant changes was to alter the main hall's use. Utzon had intended it for opera and orchestral performances, but Hall reconfigured it primarily for symphonic concerts, moving opera to a smaller hall. This change improved acoustics for orchestral music, but created compromises for opera productions, which struggled with the smaller stage. Hall's team also had to rethink materials and finishes. Utzon had planned a warm, unified palette of natural materials with detailed joinery and custom-designed fittings. Many of these details had not been costed or tested. Hall selected materials that could be sourced and installed within the reduced budget. He introduced Australian white birch plywood for the concert hall ceilings and simplified many fittings. Critics later said these choices lacked the refinement of Utzon's vision, but they allowed the building to open without further years of delay. The final years of construction were still difficult. Technical problems arose with acoustics, air conditioning, and seating layouts. The team made compromises, and not all spaces met the needs of their intended users. The smaller drama theater suffered from limited stage capacity. The opera company struggled with the cramped opera theater. Despite these issues, by the early 1970s, the building was finally nearing completion. The cost had reached more than $100 million, over 14 times the original budget. The timeline had stretched from 4 years to 14. When Queen Elizabeth II officially opened the Opera House on the 20th of October 1973, the event was a national spectacle. The building's exterior had already become a symbol of Sydney, its sails recognized worldwide. Crowds gathered on the forecourt and along the harbor to see the ceremony. The press coverage focused on the striking roof forms and the achievement of finishing such an ambitious structure. Political leaders spoke of it as a triumph of Australian skill and ambition, glossing over the bitter disputes that had marked its making. Critical reaction to the interiors was mixed. Some praised the concert hall's bright, clear acoustics for symphonic music. Others criticized the opera theater for poor sound balance and limited stage machinery. Architecture critics noted the loss of unity between the interiors and the exterior vision. Many felt the finishes lacked the subtlety and craftsmanship that Utzon had intended. Still, the building as a whole impressed both the public and professionals. It drew immediate attention from abroad and was hailed as one of the most recognizable structures in the world. Public opinion softened over time. At the opening, many Australians felt pride that outweighed the memory of the delays and cost overruns. The Opera House quickly became a major tourist draw and a focal point for cultural events. While some in the arts community lamented the compromises in design, most accepted that with them, the building might have remained incomplete for many more years. The opening day was less about settling old arguments and more about celebrating that the white sails finally stood complete against the harbor. Before the Sydney Opera House, most public buildings in Australia followed a functional model. Town halls, libraries, and performance venues often had simple shapes, regular windows, and modest decoration. Their role was to serve a practical purpose, and the design reflected that goal. Form followed function in a direct way, with little effort to make the building itself a cultural statement. The Opera House broke that pattern. Its sails did not just cover the performance spaces. They became the image of the building and the city. The design showed that a public building could work as both a functional space and a symbol. This shift had wide effects. Governments and architects began to see public buildings as opportunities to project cultural identity. The focus expanded from meeting a set of technical requirements to creating a landmark that would shape how people felt about a place. This meant the design could include forms that were not strictly necessary for the function, but carried meaning, emotion, or a connection to history. The idea was that the building could serve its purpose and also express something larger. In the Opera House, the sails linked to Sydney Harbor and maritime culture, even though the same performances could have taken place in a plain rectangular hall. The rise of expressionist architecture in the second half of the 20th century gave more tools for this approach. Expressionist forms used curves, angles, and irregular shapes to suggest movement, emotion, or natural forms. Advances in engineering and materials made such shapes possible on a large scale. Architects no longer had to rely on flat facades or strict symmetry. Instead, they could treat a building as a sculpture that people could walk inside. This change did not mean ignoring practical needs. The challenge was to integrate the expressive form with the technical systems and functions. When successful, the result could inspire visitors while still serving everyday use. Sculptural architecture also changed how people experienced buildings. In a traditional rectangular building, the form is clear from a distance and changes little as you move closer. With a sculptural form, the shape shifts as you approach, walk around, or view it from different angles. The Opera House sails overlap and separate depending on the viewpoint. Light and shadow change their appearance through the day. This dynamic quality made the building feel alive and connected to its setting. It encouraged people to engage with the building as part of the landscape, not just as a container for events. Integration with natural landscapes became a stronger focus after the Opera House showed how architecture could respond to its surroundings. The building's position on Bennelong Point placed it between the water and the city. Its white tiles reflected the sky and sea, while its elevated podium gave wide views of the harbor. This relationship between form, material, and site created a sense that the Opera House belonged to its location in a way that a standard box-shaped hall would not. Architects began to look for similar opportunities in other projects, using the setting as part of the design rather than a backdrop. In Australia, later public projects often drew on this idea of integrating with place. Federation Square in Melbourne is one example. Opened in 2002, it aimed to be more than a set of cultural venues. The design used fractured geometric forms, irregular cladding patterns, and open public spaces to connect the site to the city grid and the Yarra River. The buildings and plazas shift in shape and scale, creating a complex that invites movement and exploration. Like the Opera House, it is not a single form, but a collection of forms that respond to the context. Its open edges and varied surfaces encourage people to see it as part of the city's fabric rather than an isolated object. Federation Square also shows how the lessons of the Opera House can adapt to different settings. Where the Opera House used smooth, repeated curves, Federation Square uses angular planes and patterns. Both approaches create a strong visual identity, but each fits its environment. Sydney Harbor called for a design that echoed sails and waves. Central Melbourne, with its mix of laneways, grid streets, and rail lines, suited a design of fractured forms and open passages. In both cases, the buildings became gathering points and symbols, as well as functional spaces. This change in public architecture has also affected how people judge success. In the functional model, success might mean that a building came in on budget, opened on time, and met all technical requirements. In the landmark model, success includes whether the building becomes a source of pride, a tourist attraction, or an image associated with the city. These measures are harder to define, but have strong effects on how the building is maintained and used over time. A building that becomes a symbol can attract funding for upkeep and adaptation, while a purely functional building might be replaced once its use changes. Expressionist and sculptural forms also carry risks. They can cost more to design and build, and they may be harder to adapt to new uses. They can divide public opinion, especially if the design challenges familiar ideas of beauty or proportion. The Opera House faced criticism during construction and after opening for these reasons. Federation Square was controversial for its unconventional appearance. Yet in both cases, over time, public acceptance grew as people became used to the forms and the role they played in city life. The very qualities that seemed strange at first became part of their identity. The shift toward cultural landmarks has changed the role of architects in public projects. They are now expected to balance functional requirements, engineering constraints, and symbolic meaning. They must design for both the users inside the building and the public who see it from the outside. This dual role can create tension, as seen in the debates over the opera house interiors, but it can also produce richer results. A building that works well for performances and also defines the skyline achieves more than one that does only one of those things. Australian architecture after the Opera House shows a wider range of public forms. Museums, stadiums, and civic centers are often designed with striking shapes, distinctive materials, or integration with the landscape. The National Museum of Australia in Canberra uses sweeping curves and bold colors to tell stories about the country's history. The Perth Arena's angular blue form stands out in the city skyline. These projects owe something to the precedent set by the Opera House, that public buildings can be ambitious in form and still serve practical needs. When the Sydney Opera House opened in 1973, it became an instant reference point for architects and governments around the world. It showed that a public building could define a city's image, attract visitors, and act as a national symbol. Its sculptural form and strong link to place made it more than a venue for performances. Other countries began to see cultural buildings as a way to project identity on the global stage. This thinking influenced the design of many later landmarks, from museums to concert halls to civic centers. One of the most famous examples is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, designed by Frank Gehry and opened in 1997. Like the Opera House, it used bold, sweeping forms that challenged conventional building shapes. Its titanium curves caught the light and reflected the surrounding river and city, making it an attraction in itself. The Guggenheim did for Bilbao what the Opera House had done for Sydney, turning the city into a destination for international visitors. In both cases, the building's design became part of the city's identity, appearing on postcards, guidebooks, and promotional campaigns. The lesson was clear. A single, well-designed cultural building could shift how the world saw a place. The Beijing National Center for the Performing Arts, completed in 2007, also draws on ideas seen in the Opera House. Its domed titanium and glass shell sits in the middle of an artificial lake, making it appear to float. The reflection in the water changes with the light, creating a dynamic image that reinforces the building's connection to its setting. Inside, it houses an opera hall, a concert hall, and a theater, much like the Opera House combines multiple venues. While its form is entirely different, the principle is the same: link a striking design to a cultural function and position it as a national landmark. The Beijing NCPA shows how the Opera House's influence spread not by imitation of its sails, but by adoption of its approach, treating architecture as both an artistic and civic statement. The Opera House also set a benchmark for projects that aim to represent national identity. Before it, such projects often relied on classical styles or monumental scale to convey importance. After it, there was more willingness to use modern and experimental forms. Governments began commissioning architects with distinctive styles to design buildings that would stand out on the global stage. The value of such projects was measured not only by how they functioned, but also by the image they created for the nation. This meant that the selection of the architect became as important as the design itself, with competitions often attracting high-profile designers from around the world. This shift led to the rise of signature architecture, where the building is closely associated with the architect's personal style. The idea is that a recognizable design language can create instant identity and draw attention. The Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, designed by Zaha Hadid and opened in 2012, is an example of this trend. Its flowing, continuous surfaces seem to lift from the ground in one motion, with no visible corners or straight lines. The form creates a sense of movement and openness, and the building's white skin reflects changes in the sky. While the materials and geometry are different from the Opera House, the ambition is similar: to create a structure so distinctive that it becomes a symbol for the city and the country. The Heydar Aliyev Center also shows how signature architecture often merges technical innovation with expressive form. Its complex curves required advanced computer modeling to design and build, just as the Opera House needed early computer-aided structural analysis to solve the geometry of its shells. Both projects demanded close collaboration between architects, engineers, and builders to turn the design into a working structure. In both cases, the result was a building that could not have been made with earlier construction methods. This reliance on advanced technology has become a hallmark of signature architecture, where the form often pushes the limits of what is technically possible. Signature architecture can also shape how a building is used and perceived. In Baku, the Heydar Aliyev Center functions as a cultural center with exhibition spaces, a museum, and an auditorium, but its identity comes as much from its form as from its programming. Visitors come not only for the events, but also to see the building itself, photograph it, and experience its spaces. This mirrors the way people visit the Opera House to tour the building, even if they do not attend a performance. The architecture becomes an attraction in its own right, blurring the line between cultural function and tourism. The global ripple effect of the Opera House has not been limited to large-scale cultural buildings. Smaller projects have adopted the principle that architecture can embody place and identity through distinctive form. Waterfront developments, urban renewal schemes, and civic plazas often use a central landmark building as an anchor, designed to be both functional and visually memorable. The idea is that such a building can catalyze change in how people use and value a space, just as the Opera House transformed Bennelong Point from a tram depot into a world-renowned cultural site. The Opera House also influenced how architecture is marketed. Large public projects now often launch with renderings that highlight dramatic forms against their surroundings, much like the early drawings and models of the Opera House captured public imagination. This visual appeal can help secure funding, political support, and public interest. The risk, as seen in many later projects, is that emphasis on appearance can sometimes overshadow function, leading to buildings that are visually striking but less successful in daily use. This tension between form and function is part of the legacy of the Opera House's influence. In the decades since its completion, the Opera House has remained a touchstone in debates about the value of ambitious public architecture. Supporters point to its lasting global recognition and its role in shaping Sydney's identity. Critics note the challenges during its construction and the compromises in its interiors. Yet its influence is visible in projects as far apart as the Guggenheim Bilbao, the Beijing NCPA, and the Heydar Aliyev Center. Each of these buildings interprets the lesson of the Opera House in its own way, that a public building can be both a cultural tool and a symbol, combining advanced engineering with a form that captures the imagination. The Sydney Opera House was one of the first major buildings to rely on computer-aided structural analysis. In the 1960s, this meant feeding data into early mainframe computers to test how the shells would handle weight, wind, and movement. The method was slow compared to today's tools, but it allowed engineers to solve a geometry that could not be calculated by hand with accuracy. This use of digital calculation showed that computers could be more than accounting machines or research tools. They could shape the design of real buildings. That idea set the stage for the rise of computational design and digital modeling in architecture. Today, architects use parametric modeling software to adjust complex forms in real time, changing dimensions or curves and instantly seeing the effect on structure, cost, and performance. This approach traces back to the Opera House's precedent: start with a bold form, then use technology to make it possible. The process is now much faster and more integrated, with digital models serving as both design and construction guides. Buildings such as Beijing's Water Cube or the Heydar Aliyev Center could not have been realized without advanced modeling. In each case, the combination of design ambition and computational tools follows the same path first taken on Bennelong Point. The Opera House also shifted attitudes toward risk in architecture. Before it, many public projects avoided complex forms to reduce uncertainty. The cost overruns and delays of the Opera House were used for years as a warning against experimental designs. Yet over time, the building's success reframed the story. Cities began to see that taking calculated risks on ambitious architecture could bring long-term rewards in identity and tourism. Risk did not mean ignoring budgets or technical limits. It meant accepting that innovation carries uncertainty and requires persistence. This change encouraged architects and clients to pursue projects that would have been dismissed as impractical in earlier decades. The willingness to explore new materials, unusual structures, and unconventional layouts has led to more diverse cityscapes. Many of today's landmark projects, stadiums with retractable roofs, museums with twisted facades, and bridges with sculptural spans, come from the belief that a distinctive design can be worth the challenges it brings during construction. When the Opera House was still being built, public opinion in Sydney was divided. Some saw it as a waste of money, a project that would never be finished. Newspapers ran stories on the ballooning budget and political disputes. Many could not yet picture how the building would look when complete. After it opened, the mood changed. The same people who had criticized it began to take pride in it. It became the backdrop for celebrations, protests, and everyday photographs. This shift from skepticism to pride is common with bold architecture. At first, the unfamiliar form feels out of place or too costly. Over time, it becomes part of the shared identity of the city. For architects, the Opera House offers lessons in collaboration and persistence. Jørn Utzon's departure showed the risks when communication between designers, engineers, and clients breaks down. The project needed the skills of many people: structural engineers to solve the shell geometry, contractors to develop new construction methods, and government agencies to secure funding. Without each of these contributions, the building would not exist. Successful large projects require not just a strong vision, but also the ability to work with many stakeholders, manage disagreements, and adapt when conditions change. The Louvre Abu Dhabi, designed by Jean Nouvel and opened in 2017, is an example of these lessons applied in a modern context. The museum's most striking feature is its dome, which spans 180 meters and has a lattice pattern that filters sunlight into rays across the plaza below. The pattern is based on overlapping geometric shapes, creating a visual effect like sunlight through palm fronds. The design was ambitious and technically demanding. Achieving the dome required detailed digital modeling to plan each steel member and ensure the structure could be assembled with precision. Like the Opera House, the form came first, and the engineering followed through collaboration and technology. The Louvre Abu Dhabi also faced challenges of cost, schedule, and climate. The team had to adapt materials and systems to withstand the heat, humidity, and salt air of the Gulf. They worked with specialists in structural engineering, environmental design, and fabrication to keep the concept intact while solving practical problems. This mirrors the Opera House process, where the collaboration between creative and technical experts was essential to delivering the final building. In both cases, persistence was as important as inspiration. Many times, it would have been easier to simplify the design, but the teams found ways to maintain the defining features. These projects show that technology alone does not guarantee success. It must be paired with clear communication, trust between parties, and a willingness to solve problems together. The Opera House demonstrated that the path from sketch to structure can be long and difficult, but also that the result can transform how a city is seen. That understanding continues to guide architects who take on complex designs today. The Sydney Opera House is one of the most visited sites in Australia. Millions come each year to see its white sails against the harbor, take guided tours, and attend performances. Tourism linked to the building supports hotels, restaurants, ferries, and other local services. The building's image appears in travel campaigns, on souvenirs, and in international media, creating a constant reminder of Sydney as a destination. Economists have measured the direct and indirect value of this tourism in the billions over decades, far exceeding the original cost of construction. The Opera House also attracts international conferences, festivals, and broadcasts, bringing spending from outside the city and adding to the local economy. Its economic role is not only about visitors. The Opera House helped lift Sydney's profile as a place to live and work. A city with a global landmark gains a form of cultural prestige that can influence investment decisions. Companies often use images of the Opera House in marketing to signal a connection with Australian identity. The building's presence has encouraged urban development along the harbor, with new public spaces, walkways, and venues built in its orbit. This pattern shows how a single piece of architecture can anchor wider economic growth. The Opera House also plays a role in shaping both civic and national identity. Before it, Australia was often seen from abroad as a country defined by natural landscapes rather than urban culture. The building gave the nation a modern icon that could stand alongside the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, or the pyramids. For many Australians, it became a symbol of creativity and ambition. It represents a willingness to take on challenges that combine technical skill with artistic vision. On a civic level, it has become the backdrop for public celebrations, protests, and memorials. When Sydney marks New Year's Eve, the sails are lit with fireworks, watched by millions around the world. This repeated association between the Opera House and moments of public life reinforces its role as a shared cultural reference. In the performing arts, the Opera House has been central to Australia's cultural growth. It is home to major companies such as Opera Australia, the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and the Australian Ballet. Its stages host theatre, dance, contemporary music, and spoken word events. This concentration of cultural activity draws audiences from across the country and abroad. The variety of venues inside, from the grand concert hall to smaller drama and studio spaces, allows it to present a wide range of work. For performers, the building offers prestige. To appear at the Opera House carries weight in a career, much like performing at Carnegie Hall or La Scala. This reputation helps attract international artists, expanding the range of cultural experiences available to local audiences. The Opera House also works as an incubator for new work. Its facilities and profile give emerging artists a platform to reach larger audiences. Educational programs bring students into contact with professional productions, linking the building's cultural role to future generations. The diversity of events ensures it is not only for high art, but also for popular and community-based performances. This breadth of activity makes it a living cultural institution rather than a static monument. As a symbol, the Opera House has power beyond its immediate location. Its outline is recognized across the world, even by people who have never been to Sydney. In global media, it often stands for Australia as a whole, whether in sports coverage, political stories, or cultural features. This symbolic role is more than visual shorthand. It communicates ideas about the country. The sails suggest openness, connection to the sea, and a modern identity that embraces creativity. In this sense, the Opera House works as a cultural ambassador, projecting an image of Australia that is sophisticated and outward-looking. This symbolic power can carry diplomatic weight. International events held at the Opera House often attract government leaders, artists, and business figures, providing opportunities for cultural exchange. When the sails are lit in the colors of another nation's flag after a tragedy or celebration, it signals solidarity and respect. Such gestures can resonate more deeply than official statements, showing the capacity of architecture to communicate values without words. The Opera House also connects Australia to global cultural networks. Touring productions that might skip a city without a high-profile venue often include Sydney because of the Opera House's facilities and reputation. This brings in work from around the world and exposes Australian audiences to a broader range of ideas and styles. In return, Australian productions staged here gain visibility that can help them tour internationally. The building thus acts as both a gateway for cultural import and a launch point for cultural export. The economic, civic, artistic, and symbolic roles of the Opera House feed into each other. Tourism brings income that supports the upkeep of the building and the programming inside. The cultural activity reinforces the building's status as a symbol worth visiting. The national identity it projects makes it more valuable as a tourism draw, and the economic benefits strengthen the argument for continued investment in the arts. This cycle keeps the Opera House central to Sydney's and Australia's public life decades after it opened. The building's ability to move from a source of controversy during its construction to a source of pride is a reminder of how public perception can shift. Initial criticism focused on cost and delays. Now, the same project is cited as an example of visionary thinking that paid off. That change did not happen instantly. It it came through years of active use, successful events, and consistent presentation of the Opera House as part of the city's identity. For cities considering ambitious cultural projects, the Opera House offers evidence that the long-term gains in reputation, tourism, and civic pride can outweigh the difficulties of construction. Maintaining the Sydney Opera House is more complex than caring for most buildings. Its roof shells are made of over 1 million ceramic tiles, each with a specific size, curve, and glaze. When tiles are damaged or weathered, replacements must match exactly in appearance and fit. This requires careful sourcing and, in some cases, custom production. The position of the shells also makes access difficult. Workers use suspended scaffolding, cranes, and harness systems to reach certain sections, often working around events and public visits. Wind, salt air from the harbor, and strong sunlight all affect the materials, so inspections are constant. Even the podium beneath the sails, made of large concrete sections and granite cladding, requires specialized repairs to avoid visible changes. Inside, the building's unique geometry creates challenges for mechanical systems. Air conditioning ducts, lighting rigs, and cabling must be fitted into curved spaces without harming the visual design. When equipment fails or needs replacement, the work often has to be custom designed to fit. This is different from a standard theater where systems can be swapped with off-the-shelf components. The complexity means that maintenance planning is long-term, with some projects scheduled years in advance to secure the right materials, design approvals, and technical expertise. Balancing heritage with modern upgrades is a constant task. The Opera House is both a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a working performance venue. Heritage protection requires that changes do not alter the building's essential character, while performance demands can require new technology. For example, the concert hall's acoustics were widely criticized for orchestral music. Addressing this meant replacing stage risers, adding new reflectors, and installing modern sound systems, but all changes had to respect the visual integrity of the space. Engineers and designers worked to hide new elements within existing forms or use materials that matched Utzon's palette. Lighting is another example. Stage lighting now relies on LED fixtures for energy efficiency and better control, but these produce a different color temperature than older lamps. Designers must select equipment and settings that meet technical needs without changing the audience's visual experience of the interiors. Even small changes in light quality can affect how wood panels and fabrics appear. This kind of detail is part of the balance between modernization and heritage. Sustainability has become an important part of the Opera House's management. The building was designed before energy efficiency was a standard concern, so retrofits are necessary to reduce environmental impact. A major upgrade involved installing a seawater cooling system that uses the harbor as a heat sink for air conditioning. This reduced reliance on traditional chillers and cut energy use. Lighting systems across the building have been converted to LED where possible, reducing electricity demand and maintenance needs. Water-saving fixtures and improved waste management systems have also been introduced. These changes make the building more sustainable without altering its appearance or function. Green retrofits must work with the building's structure. For instance, adding insulation to the roof is not straightforward, as the shells are thin and their surface is visible both inside and out. Instead, improvements focus on upgrading glazing, sealing joints, and optimizing mechanical systems. Solar panels could provide clean energy, but placing them on the shells would damage the visual form. This means renewable energy options must be placed out of sight or supplied from off-site sources. Sustainability planning for the Opera House therefore involves careful trade-offs between environmental gains and preservation of heritage value. In 2004, the New South Wales government adopted the Utzon design principles to guide all future changes. These were developed in consultation with Jørn Utzon himself, ensuring that upgrades would stay true to his vision. The principles emphasize the relationship between the building and the harbor, the use of natural materials, the clarity of geometric forms, and the integration of design across all elements. They also recognize the need for the building to evolve as a living performance space. This framework allows modernization while keeping the core identity intact. Following these principles can mean rejecting some proposals. For example, adding large external signage for events could interfere with the pure lines of the podium and sails. Instead, digital projection on the shells is used for temporary displays, which leave no permanent marks. Interior renovations must use materials that match or complement Utzon's original palette, such as the white birch plywood in the concert hall or the off-form concrete in public foyers. Even when technology changes, such as new lighting controls or digital sound systems, their physical presence must be discrete, integrated into existing joinery, or concealed from view. One renovation guided by these principles was the upgrade of the Joan Sutherland Theatre. The stage machinery had become outdated and unsafe, limiting the kinds of productions that could be staged. The solution involved replacing the entire fly tower and mechanical systems while keeping the theater's visual identity unchanged. This required dismantling large sections of the stage in a way that allowed materials to be reused or replaced with matching finishes. The new equipment is more reliable, faster, and quieter, but the audience sees the same warm wood surfaces and seating arrangement as before. Preservation also involves documentation. Detailed digital scans of the building record every surface and joint. These records are vital for both maintenance and disaster planning. If any part of the building were damaged, accurate data would allow faithful reconstruction. Digital models also help plan upgrades, letting teams test how a change will look and function before committing to construction. This technology extends the Opera House's tradition of using the latest tools to solve design challenges, just as early computers helped create the original shells. The Opera House shows that preserving a landmark is an active, ongoing process. Its distinctive forms and heritage status mean every intervention must be deliberate and precise. By combining careful maintenance, sensitive modernization, and sustainability measures, the building continues to serve as both a performance venue and a symbol, without losing the qualities that made it unique. The Utzon design principles provide the guide, ensuring that even as technology and needs change, the building's identity remains clear. The influence of the Sydney Opera House can be seen in many buildings where sculptural form, technical problem-solving, and connection to place come together. One clear Australian example is Frank Gehry's Dr. Chow Chak Wing building at the University of Technology, Sydney. Completed in 2015, it houses the business school and is made of over 300,000 custom-shaped bricks. The brickwork is not laid in flat planes, but curves and folds, giving the building a crumpled appearance from some angles and a flowing surface from others. Like the Opera House, it required precise planning and fabrication. The irregular form meant that bricklayers could not follow standard courses. Each brick's position was digitally modeled, and detailed guides were produced for construction. The building shows how a non-traditional form can still use familiar materials if the engineering and design are tightly coordinated. The Opera House proved decades earlier that with the right systems, complex shapes could be realized on a large scale, and Gehry's project builds on that lesson. Federation Square in Melbourne also reflects ideas first demonstrated on Bennelong Point. Opened in 2002, it combines cultural institutions, public plazas, and hospitality spaces into a single urban complex. The buildings are clad in panels of sandstone, zinc, and glass arranged in triangular patterns, creating a fractured geometry across the facades. The site connects directly to the Yarra River, the city's transport hub, and the historic Flinders Street station. Like the Opera House, its design was controversial during planning and construction. Critics questioned its irregular forms and unconventional public spaces. Over time, it became a popular gathering place and a recognized part of Melbourne's identity. Its integration of performance spaces, museums, and outdoor areas mirrors the Opera House's role as more than a single-purpose venue. The boldness of its form reflects the confidence to see a public building as a cultural landmark, even at the risk of initial public resistance. Globally, many projects show the same combination of sculptural ambition, advanced engineering, and site-specific thinking. The Harpa Concert Hall in Reykjavik, Iceland, designed by Henning Larsen Architects and artist Olafur Eliasson, is an example. Its glass facade is made of geometric modules inspired by basalt columns found in Icelandic landscapes. The modules catch and refract light, changing the building's appearance with the weather and time of day. The structure behind the glass had to be engineered to resist both heavy snow loads and strong coastal winds. Like the Opera House, Harpa uses its setting not as a backdrop, but as an active element in its identity, linking the building's design to its natural surroundings. Another example is the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, Germany, designed by Herzog and de Meuron and opened in 2017. Built atop an existing brick warehouse on the waterfront, it combines historic structure with a new glass volume whose curved roofline echoes waves and sails. The concert hall inside sits on a complex system of springs to isolate it from vibration, allowing clear acoustics despite the active port nearby. The Opera House had already shown that a waterfront performance venue could become a city symbol and that technical challenges could be solved without compromising a dramatic form. The Elbphilharmonie extends that idea by merging old and new construction into a unified landmark. In Asia, the National Center for the Performing Arts in Beijing, designed by Paul Andro, offers a different take on integrating sculpture and setting. The titanium and glass dome sits within an artificial lake, which visitors cross via an underwater walkway. The reflection of the dome in the water creates a doubled image, much like the way the Opera House's sails interact with Sydney Harbor. The engineering of the dome required a lightweight but strong structure to span more than 200 meters without internal supports blocking the performance spaces. The Opera House had already demonstrated the potential of prefabrication and modular assembly for unusual forms, and similar methods were adapted for the NCPA's construction. In the Middle East, the Oman Royal Opera House in Muscat blends modern performance technology with architectural elements drawn from local tradition. While it does not share the Opera House's sculptural form, it follows the principle of aligning a building's identity with its cultural context. The materials, proportions, and decorative details draw from Omani heritage, while the stage and backstage systems meet the standards of international touring productions. This balance of cultural expression and technical sophistication echoes the Opera House's approach, where the design was rooted in place but required advanced engineering to achieve. Other projects show the Opera House's influence in the way they handle public space. The Oslo Opera House, designed by Snøhetta, invites visitors to walk up its sloping roof, turning the building itself into part of the city's pedestrian network. This openness recalls the Opera House's wide podium and forecourt, where people gather whether or not they have tickets for a performance. In both cases, the architecture blurs the line between cultural venue and public space, making the building a daily presence in civic life rather than an isolated object. The pattern that connects these examples is the willingness to treat a building as both a functional machine and a piece of large-scale art, integrated with its surroundings. The Opera House proved that the two roles could coexist, provided that design, engineering, and construction were coordinated from the earliest stages. Frank Gehry's UTS building applies this to a university setting. Federation Square adapts it to an urban cultural hub. Harpa and the Elbphilharmonie show its relevance to concert halls in very different climates. The Beijing NCPA and Oman's Opera House adapt it to different cultural contexts, and the Oslo Opera House expands it into the realm of public space design. Each case uses its own materials, forms, and technologies, but the shared influence is visible in the way ambition is matched with technical problem-solving and a clear link to place. The Sydney Opera House changed what architects, engineers, and governments believed was possible for public buildings. Before it, most large civic projects aimed for efficiency, durability, and a familiar appearance. The Opera House showed that a building could be daring in form, complex in structure, and still function as a working venue. Its sails were not a decorative extra. They were the heart of the design, defining its identity and shaping how the world saw Sydney. This success reshaped architectural ambition, making it acceptable, sometimes expected, for landmark projects to take visual and technical risks. The building demonstrated that vision has to lead the process. Jørn Utzon's early sketches captured an idea that went beyond the standard theater model. He did not begin with a conventional plan and make it more decorative. He started with a sculptural concept and found ways to make it work as a performance space. This reversed the usual order of design. It required engineers to develop new calculations, builders to invent new methods, and officials to accept that the process might take longer than planned. The result was not perfect. Delays, cost overruns, and changes to the interiors proved that ambition carries risks, but the final form validated the effort. It stood as proof that architectural innovation can survive the practical realities of construction. The Opera House also illustrated the importance of calculated risk. Taking on an unconventional design without understanding the technical and financial challenges can sink a project. Utzon's decision to base the sails on a sphere was a form of risk management. It reduced the number of unique elements and allowed prefabrication. It was a creative solution that made the design easier to build without sacrificing the visual concept. This kind of thinking, identifying the core idea, finding the constraints, and adapting the method, has become a model for complex projects since. Risk in architecture is not about ignoring problems. It is about finding ways to make a bold vision feasible. For future architects, the Opera House is both a warning and an encouragement. It warns that pushing boundaries will bring resistance, whether from politics, budgets, or public opinion. Utzon's resignation shows what can happen when trust breaks down between designer and client. At the same time, the building's eventual acceptance and celebration show that persistence and clarity of vision can change minds. Many buildings that were controversial in their early years, the Eiffel Tower, Centre Pompidou, even Federation Square, follow a similar pattern. What matters is whether the design offers lasting value in form, function, and meaning. The Opera House encourages architects to challenge conventions, but it also shows that challenges must be backed by technical skill and collaboration. Utzon worked with some of the best engineers of the time to refine the structure. The early use of computer modeling was essential to solving the geometry of the shells. This mix of creative ambition and technical partnership is now standard in major projects. From the Louvre Abu Dhabi's lattice dome to the twisting towers of modern skyscrapers, many designs depend on this combination. The Opera House proved that architecture at the edge of possibility requires close teamwork between disciplines from the first day. It also expanded the idea of what architecture is for. A theater or concert hall had once been judged mainly on how well it served its performers and audiences. The Opera House met those needs, but it also became a symbol of Australia, a driver of tourism, and a backdrop for national events. It worked as infrastructure, but also as an image and a cultural reference point. This made it clear that architecture could act as a cultural force, shaping how people see a place and how they relate to it. That understanding has since guided projects that aim to be both functional and emblematic. Museums, sports arenas, bridges, and even libraries now often carry a distinct visual identity meant to resonate beyond their immediate use. Architecture as a cultural force means that buildings can influence how communities see themselves. The Opera House gave Sydney a symbol of creativity and connection to the sea. It became part of people's mental map of the city, used in everything from tourism posters to personal wedding photographs. It also influenced the city's development, encouraging the creation of public spaces along the harbor and inspiring other cultural projects. This effect extends far beyond the performances inside. The building's form and presence changed the city's self-image, which in turn affected how it planned for the future. For architects, this carries a responsibility. A building that becomes a landmark will shape its surroundings for decades or centuries. The Opera House shows the rewards of getting it right. A design that fits its setting, inspires pride, and adapts to changing uses. It also shows the cost of getting it wrong, disputes, criticism, and compromises that can weaken the original vision. The lasting lesson is that big ideas need both creative courage and practical discipline. The Opera House also underlines the value of rooting a design in its context. The sails make sense on Bennelong Point because they connect visually and symbolically to the harbor. A similar form in a desert or forest might lose its meaning. Many buildings influenced by the Opera House succeed because they adapt its principles rather than copy its shape. The Harpa Concert Hall reflects Iceland's basalt columns. The Elbphilharmonie echoes Hamburg's port waves. The Oslo Opera House slopes into the fjord's edge. Each takes the lesson, respond to place with ambition, and applies it in its own way. Finally, the Opera House teaches that time can change the judgment of architecture. In the 1960s, it was a political flashpoint. In the 1970s, it was a new and imperfect venue. By the 2000s, it was a World Heritage Site and one of the most recognized buildings on Earth. Its journey from controversy to acceptance is part of its influence. It suggests that truly innovative architecture may need years or even generations before its value is fully understood. For architects and clients alike, this is a reminder that the measure of success may lie in the long term, beyond the immediate headlines and budget reports.